Here to discuss, the terrorism expert and legal guru from ClarionProject.org, Jennifer Breedon. Jennifer, good to have you back. Jennifer, first of all, this executive order does not include Iraq like the first order did. Why do you think the president chose to drop Iraq from the list?
Well, I actually think there are a couple of reasons for that. One of those reasons is the fact that Mike Pence just visited the Kurdistan region, and Kurdish citizens technically right now, because they don't have a state yet, they don't have their own sovereign nation, and so right now Kurds technically have Iraqi passports, but they are our greatest allies. Not only they're allies of the United States, they're allies of Israel in general. Kurds have a secular government, and they're protecting a lot of the minorities in that region. I think it's a very positive step that Pence went there. I think that has one thing to do with it, is that they don't want to include the Kurds who have Iraqi passports in this ban as just a show of friendship and solidarity with people that are so pro-American and so anti-ISIS and terrorism. It also probably has to do with the fact that I know the Kurds and the U.S. has been working with some of the Iraqi forces, so they want to, keep that relationship building and strong so that Iraq, once it's regained its territory from ISIS, can have a positive relationship not only with Baghdad, but with the Kurdistan region.
All right, now the executive order also will suspend refugee entries for 120 days, but it doesn't ban Syrian refugees indefinitely as it did before. Was this change to keep it from being thrown out in court, or what's your suspicion there?
I'm not actually sure about that. There's a chance that it might have been to protect it from the courts. But again, I think a lot rests on that meeting that Mike Pence had with the Kurdish officials and with Kurdish President Barzani, because part of what they've been doing in the Kurdish region is to take in some of the Syrian refugees. They vet them themselves, and they're giving them security jobs against ISIS. They're much better vetters than we are right now, as it turns out. And so I think some of that has been some of these unspoken partnerships, being able to help them. In the same respect, this isn't against refugees, and that's one thing we need to remember, is that it's not a ban, it's not hurting the refugees, it's not to break down these victims, the actual refugees that are victims. It's a chance of looking at, look, what's happening is that refugees come in from the United Nations. That's a process that we don't trust right now, and we need time to look at what the UN process is doing, because they're the ones that first pluck these people out for us to vet to come into this country. So it's more to protect the people that would eventually come into here rather than it is against them. It's more to really hold the UN accountable.
Jennifer, we also found out today that hundreds of people admitted to the United States as refugees are the subject of FBI counterterrorism investigations. Do we know how many and whether they came here to hurt us or whether they were radicalized here in the U.S. already? And how in the world do we take care of this problem?
Well, and one of the things we're not going to know. We don't know the exact number. We're probably not going to know, because a lot of that falls under these exceptions within the Freedom of Information Act, the exceptions like national security and all these other things, ongoing investigations. So we're probably never going to know the exact number or what's going on there. We might at some point find out the details, but again, that all falls under the exceptions. But, the way to eradicate this and the way to move forward with this is realizing that a lot of people have been radicalized on U.S. soil, and we really need to strengthen our ability to investigate these people and to investigate possible instances of radical Islamic terrorism. When I was in the Middle East, the Muslims in the Middle East, they're investigating mosques that have extremist ties. They investigate Muslims that have extremist ties. They do it all the time because they know this threat very well. And we, for the last 8 years, have been ignoring this threat. We've been ignoring the sources of it. I think that's something that the Trump administration is trying very hard to better and to make sure that we can do that. That's all within his powers as a national security and the foreign policy leader.
The first travel ban, of course, was put in place while the Department of Justice was run by Obama holdovers. But now Jeff Sessions is running things. Is this going to make a difference? Could the original ban have held up if Sessions had been in place?
No, because I actually think, we had talked about this before. The Ninth Circuit had two pretty good arguments. One of those being the fact that there was a religious test at some point, and the other one being actually a Republican case where they went against Obama's blanket amnesty by saying that it harms the states economically. Trump actually eradicated both of those things in this revised thing. And if you really read through the old court records, if they try to take this to court again, which I'm sure they will, it's going to be a really hard time to overturn it, because Trump really addressed all of the issues that were brought up the first time. He did a great job of revising it. And the only thing they're going to be able to use against him in the courts is the fact that he stated during the campaign trail that Rudy Giuliani might have stated that it was intended to be a Muslim ban, but nowhere in the text does it state that. So they're not going to be able to use that. It's going to be a far stretch, and it's not going to be enough to overturn this revised ban.
Doesn't take a terror expert to figure out that bad actors have come into the country in the time since the courts stopped the first executive order. Do we have any guess on those numbers? Because if you were a terrorist, you would have come in right after all the chaos happened in the first place.
I know, and I wish I could guess on these numbers. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those politicians that wants to come on and lie. It's going to be hard. They're not going to release those numbers. It could be two, it could be 200. But in terms of counterterrorism investigations, we have seen over the last, 5 years and even more so than that they have foiled a lot of these because of their investigations. But we've also seen under the Obama administration, the FBI messed this up and let some of those FBI investigations go when in fact there was a terrorist in the making. And so it's going to be interesting to see how under President Trump, these investigations into possible terrorist connections or activities are alleviated, eradicated. But again, for national security, our current Freedom of Information Act, which nobody could get unless, we sue the government for this. But even then, it falls under the exception of ongoing investigations and national security. The government won't release that. We tried to get these records before. Hopefully we'll find out at some point. I think we have a president now who is very transparent with the American people, which is a positive step.
I agree with you. I think it'll be interesting to see. We know that airline stocks went down today. Of course, those temporary things are expected to happen, really, when something like this goes on. But we know that the opposite side, those opposing Trump, are all geared up for some big protests in about 10 days when all of this takes effect. So we'll have to be watching then. Thank you so much for being with us, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me on.